Hello and welcome to Loose Cannon, the Civil Liberties podcast. Today it's just me. Parnell is a bit busy now with the lockdown lifting somewhat here in Sydney. So today I just decided I would grab another Sydney, amateur podcaster who's been in Parnell's Twitter circle and has had some very interesting things to say in newspaper articles about Australian civil liberties, and especially under COVID. And his name is Misha Saul. Is that pronounced correctly?
That's perfect.
Yeah. I have a Colombian friend who is Saul. So yeah. You're happy with Saul?
I am happy with Saul, and my wife's Mexican, and so when I go over there, they all get confused about first name, surname. Should they call me Saul or whatever? But that's fine.
Yeah. And your podcast is the Eureka Podcast, correct?
It is the Eureka Podcast. That's exactly right.
Yes. Now, well, thanks for agreeing to have a chat.
We're absolute pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And we're quite, I guess, similar, like two Sydney Jewish guys with vaguely Eastern European backgrounds. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
We don't know each other. So this is the first time we've spoken. So we'll, I guess, get to know each other while a couple of other people might be listening. Maybe my sister or my mum. I don't know.
No, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thanks. And so how do you know Parnell? What is this mysterious WhatsApp group you mentioned?
So Parnell and I were first introduced through Claire Lehman, who's a mutual friend. Claire runs Quillette. It's based in Sydney, and it's a global outlet for free thinkers. That's probably the way I kind of think about it. She might describe it slightly differently. And someone added me to a Signal group with Parnell and a few other media folk, and I've enjoyed just chatting with them and interacting with Parnell over time. So I'd say we're fairly recent acquaintances, and I admire her writing.
I think about, I don't know, could be like 4 years ago or something, I might have sent a kind of a fan email to Claire Lehman saying, hey, how about I be your podcast guy for Quillette? And I didn't hear back, but that's probably because she gets 20,000 emails. And anyway, now they have a really good podcast, and which I listen to. So they sorted it out.
She lives nearby, and she's super lovely person. So it would be snowed under with emails or kids or whatever it is.
Yeah, and given at that time, probably she was doing it all like single-handedly. It's not surprising. Yeah. So I first came across you via this article that appeared in, I think, USA Today and a few other places. Was it also in the Fin Review?
No, it was just USA Today. Then I think it was syndicated to like Yahoo.com and stuff like that.
Okay.
But, I couldn't even access the USA Today article. You needed like a US credit card to even become a subscriber, and it was very difficult. It was so it was a schlep in itself. But yeah.
Basically about how Australia had been responding to COVID, and I'm interested. Tell me what happened to your wife when she came back to Australia. Well, first of all, I should say congratulations on going through the humiliating experience of begging the People's Commissariat of the Border Force and successfully geting permission to travel. What happened when she came back?
So I'm always cautious, kind of. I mean, I did write it. I was very vocal about it on Twitter, and I wrote an article about it, so I can't complain. But I don't want to come across as too much of a sook with these things, because a lot of people obviously have gone through far worse things in Australia and elsewhere. But I guess I did feel quite acutely the general indignity I guess I don't want to kind of use this term too much, but like the kind of oppressiveness of the kind of faceless bureaucracy that kind of runs the entire system. And so I was pretty pissed off, and my wife was pretty pissed off, I think. So what happened, basically, she was in Mexico and she was kind of let out of this country, as you rightly sneer at the kind of, the position we're in, having to ask our government to leave the country, which is totally pathological in itself. But she went for the full 3 months, and she came back, and obviously we did the quarantine thing, which is entirely sensible. And so a few things happened. Firstly, and what kind of probably prompted the article, when a USA Today journalist reached out to me after I started whinging about it on Twitter. They had been tested throughout the entire period and had been all coming back negative. And I've got 3 kids, under 4. So it was my wife and 3 kids under 4. And so, you can imagine what she was going through in quarantine alone under those circumstances in a hotel room. And she was very keen to get out, as I'm sure any parent would understand. And there ended up being a delay. And it was very unclear what was kind of causing the delay. They had returned negative tests the entire time. Obviously, you kind of get tested periodically through the quarantine, and then they get tested on exit. And the delay was kind of inexplicable. And so my wife was kind of annoyed and kind of demanding release. And then, they weren't really giving her a reason why she was being held. And so we're in this strange situation where she's done the full 2 weeks, and that's fine. That's all kosher. And then, they tested her and the kids throughout, and they've all been negative. And then your release, moment comes up, and you're not allowed to go. And so, it's very, and so like, they're not being tortured or something, but it's an interesting question. And, we felt it quite acutely. On what grounds are they holding them?
Yeah.
They're not even saying, they're not explaining the nature of the risk. There's not even, a decision framework. They're literally just saying, look, we need, it literally felt like the bureaucratic gears were just turning somewhere, and someone had to approve something, and probably not one person, probably a few people had to approve something. And so, and this lasted for 12 hours or thereabouts. And so, I was excited to pick up my kids and my wife, and then suddenly I'm not able to. And so I'm basically throwing up a stink. I'm not leaving the hotel facility. Then I end up kind of leaving. That wasn't helpful. I was kind of giving grief unnecessarily to a super friendly security guard, and then the nurse was very understanding, etc. And so everyone I kind of interacted with was super lovely. And then I kind of called the minister's office, and the person there was super lovely, and so on. And so everyone you're interacting with is super lovely, but obviously you can't kind of reach a decision maker, which makes sense. You can't have kind of every concerned father kind of speaking, having the minister on dial. But there was this kind of faceless bureaucracy doing something in the background without any communication, and effectively holding my family for a day with no cause. And I think, and that basically sparked my outrage. And so I wrote this article to that effect. And I think, in my mind, this was kind of the cherry on top at the time. I was pretty outraged at the broader situation by that point. I think it's totally sick that Australia, basically uniquely in the world, banned exit. And as you kind of noted earlier, you and I are from, kind of former Soviet bloc, and it felt very Soviet. And I kind of grew up, hearing the stories about my family being granted exit from the Soviet Union. My immediate family, we left basically around the time of the Soviet Union collapse in like 91. So that I'm not talking about that, but kind of my relatives whom we followed to Australia, were part of the Soviet, emigre waves after, finally they were let out after there was a global campaign demanding that the Soviet Union, allow Jews to leave.
Yeah.
And obviously, and you can cut me off whenever I'm boring you, or you want to kind of ask anything. But,
No, you go
but I
ahead.
guess, yeah, but I guess like that whole banning exit, I was just shocked that happened. I looked around and no one seemed to care, and no one kind of got it.
That's it, isn't it? That's exactly it. That's what I felt very acutely, that something that felt to me just unbearable was like, whatever for everyone else. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like a I think it's easy to kind of get caught up in theoretical, principled stances, and I kind of try to avoid that a little bit. But to not be allowed to leave your country, and we were not, like, our friends, one of them had a sick mother in the UK, and there are stories abound, that are, and to not be able to to do that. I don't think we faced something like that before in Australia. And to be honest, I'm very grateful to this country for all the opportunities it's granted me and my family as an immigrant family. And I think Australia, is a place where the American dream, so to speak, really lives, and it is the land of opportunity. But this really fundamentally changed my perspective around the Australian polity, amongst other things which we can discuss if of interest.
Yeah, it certainly revealed stuff about the Australian character, didn't it? It's what do you think, the people with an Eastern European background, what do you think it gives us that other people in Australia don't, sort of a lens that other people in Australia don't have? I've actually noticed that so there's other podcasters that I listen to and kind of agree with a lot, not necessarily on civil liberties, but there's these two girls in New York, or young women, Red Scare podcast.
Yeah.
And
Great.
I like listening to them, and I don't know if it's...
I think, I think yes is a short answer. I think, Australia and the US, but, I'll speak for Australia, especially post kind of Cold War through the 90s, and since then probably decreasing. But, I grew up in the 90s, and, the water I swam in was this kind of deep optimism and this kind of effusive sense that, the arc of the world bent towards justice and, progress. And there's this kind of infinite upward trajectory. And I think the context that Australians kind of look at things, that everything's just kind of fine. Whereas, I think if you speak to, like, I was cycling with a Yugoslavian, a guy, really a great guy with Yugoslavian background, and he kind of saw these shock troops everywhere at one point in Sydney.
Yeah.
And I was shocked, and I was like, what is this? And he was like, what is this, like Serbia? Like it's sick. And he's sending videos to the family, and the family are like, is everything okay? And so, I think there is a real, we recognize it and we see it. And I think, like, even, and this isn't like partisan thing at all. Like, and I think, when we saw the videos of the protesters in Melbourne and what, just recently, last few weeks, and what the police were doing there. I mean, I thought, like, it was draconian and, massively overreach. And it was clearly, abuses of power, and not just by the police, but, the kind of petty, the kind of pettiness of, the premier in Victoria, kind of shutting down playgrounds and all these other totally unscientific, vindictive, arbitrary exercises of power. And I hadn't really seen that before. And, we don't really think of our politicians and our police in that way in Australia. I think people don't fear the police, which is like a great thing. That's a feature, not a bug. And, I think on balance, people have a kind of respectful relationship with police and authority. And I feel like I do as well. But, when they came, to my home, or, when you're seeing these things happen on the street, I think it's, it's shocking to kind of see that. And frankly, your point around others not seeing it, I think your view and my view here, we are in the minority. I think the majority of people, of Australians, I don't claim to speak for them, because what I see is a general complacency and complicity with this kind of, hall monitor class, snitching kind of culture that we've seen develop.
Indeed. I think like I see people wearing masks with not a person around for miles, and I think, like it's this idea that teacher is watching, and we have to be like, we have to make sure we're doing the right thing, like that kind of. I don't even know how to describe it. This sort of teacher's
subservience.
Pet.
The teacher's pet thing. I think it's totally right. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I got there was some random bloke in the western suburbs or whatever in Sydney who got cuffed in front of his daughter, young girl, for not wearing a mask, and he was like in the bush somewhere. Right. Or something. There wasn't like anyone around.
Yeah.
And, and so I got into this biff with some, big fund manager in Australia over it, because I said, look, it's really not that hard.
Should explain. You've worked in the financial world, yeah?
Oh yeah, I'm in finance, but this isn't like a guy with like some random anonymous guy with like one. This is like a pretty well known, thoughtful Australian fund manager, basically very super smart guy. I've deep respect, but I just found it really insightful and instructive. And I basically said, look, I'm sure this dad, he didn't have a mask. Yes, he was breaking the rules. And yeah, you know what? I bet it wasn't part of the article or whatever in the newspaper, but I bet he was probably dismissive and rude to the police. Like I bet, I'm not pretending people are saints or whatever. And they just like cuffed him for not wearing. And I just thought, you know what? Like it's just not that hard, I'm sure there are gray lines and police got to do their jobs, but like there are some things you do and there are some things you don't, and police exercise discretion all the time around what they.
If a policeman wanted to exercise their discretion against me, a sort of skinny, nerdy white guy in the eastern suburbs, every single day of this lockdown, they could have arrested me or they could have fined me, because.
Yeah. I'm sure it was unevenly distributed, as you note, like between suburbs and people. But I'm not even making the discrimination point. I'm just saying, like, don't handcuff dudes who are alone with their daughter playing in the bush. Like it's just not that hard, okay, for not like wearing a mask, okay. Like you don't need to be a genius. Like as the cop, I don't want to be doing that. I don't want to be going home to my wife saying I just handcuffed this dude, okay. And this fund manager called me vile vermin for expressing that view, and basically, went off in a huff because I was effectively, a rule breaker, and I just thought it's perfect, isn't it? Like, I mean, like, there's a rule, and it's a very Australian mindset. There's a rule. Don't ask why, don't ask who, don't ask what. It's a rule, and we must obey it. And something about that really sickens me. So I mean, I kind of see that everywhere. I think it's a majority of views. So I think unfortunately, like when I saw the unionists in Melbourne breaking off and having their protests and stuff, and then I saw the police come in and kind of bash them up, and then you kind of see the former head of the Australian Labor Party, Bill Shorten, call them Nazis basically, and you kind of see this word them being called far right extremists, and there's this massive basically giving cover to the cops to do what you will. And I'm not a unionist. I'm some like guy living in Sydney's North Shore. I'm in finance. I'm like as far away from like blue collar land as you can see. But and I'm sure I would disagree with a lot of the things these views these protesters have. These, I don't think you probably can't describe them as my people, so to speak, but I really felt they were mine in that moment, because I felt they were abandoned by their people. They were abandoned by their union leadership. They were abandoned by the Australian Labor Party. They were abandoned by the kind of emasculated, overeducated, progressives that dominate the movement. And so who do they have left? And I thought, my goodness, everyone's called, the Australian left has been so kind of hollowed out by its, kind of overeducated, emasculated, bureaucratic class, that it can't even recognize a white collar worker.
Yeah.
Sorry, a blue collar worker. And if you've been to a construction site or a mine, these are blokes, how they act, and in the normal course of things, but that kind of rough, gruff, blue collar guys doing what they've always done, and kind of also voicing their legitimate grievance at the kind of state overreach. The left can't even recognize that, and once upon a time the left would have been once really among them. Yes. And kind of joining them in their fight. And I thought and so I just found that whole episode really depressing, and I think the majority of Australians are against them, and they're the left's against them as well. And it made me realize, if something were to if I were on the wrong side of things here, if I were on the wrong side of arbitrary state power, if I were locked up unfairly for whatever reason, no one's going to be there for me, because I think me or my family, because I think, and I don't expect to, obviously, but you can see that playing out, where Australians are unable to exercise basic what we would have considered rights, protest, and the like, and no one really sticks up for them. So I really felt despondent following that whole episode.
Can you hear that in the background, the mowing guy?
I can't hear anything.
Oh,
nope.
Good.
Yeah.
So like I think this is the thing. I think I'm a far leftist. I think I'm a Marxist, even potentially, on the economic and social justice stuff. Economic justice stuff. And I don't understand it's really disappointing that people who I think I would agree with on many issues can't see what you've been saying, and it's interesting that the health experts, who have been behind, the governments have been hiding behind on a lot of these moves. It's almost as though, they're the right kind of people. They went to university, they studied social work or public health. They have the best interests and best intentions of everyone, and it sort of makes it all fine because they're like me, they're my kind of person. They're do you think that there's a bit of that? Like if the public health official sounded like Donald Trump, do you think they would be, so compliant?
Yeah, I mean, but by the way, I love like when you said, when you reached out, want to speak to me and said you were, hard left was the kind of word you used. I thought that was great, because, I never would have been described as left, and I'm quite like, I've always been kind of, very free markety,
Actually, you know
kind of
what?
oriented.
Yeah, let me slightly rephrase my question, because my question was a bit rambling and silly. Let me say this. So I was heavily influenced by a Marxist political economist historian called Immanuel Wallerstein. Emmanuel Wallerstein, good Jewish name. He wrote from New York. He wrote 4-volume series called The Modern World System, tracing capitalism back to its origins in 16th century Europe. It's a very God's eye view of long historical change, understanding history through the rhythms of capitalism. So like the structural division between the core of the world economy and peripheral zones of the world economy, and also of Kondratiev long waves of expansion and contraction. Anyway, that's all, another discussion. But fundamentally, when he wrote his articles and his op-eds and all that, it was all historical materialist based. It was like people's attitudes politically don't magically develop from nowhere. They come from how people make a living. Their values emerge from how where they're placed in society, their professions, etc. So I just apply that to the middle class and the professional class as well. Like they've got biases, they've got self-interest. When they're given power to exercise it over others, it goes to their heads just like in any other person. So, that's.
Yeah, the way I think about it, someone said this once, and I kind of I thought it really resonated with me. I think the left are right about class and wrong about everything else. And I've always thought that's actually very acute, I think, or astute rather. I thought that always made sense to me. But I guess my broader point is when you kind of told me, you were hard left. I come from this kind of forgotten, discarded tradition of actually, being able to have a fine conversation with people you disagree with, or people, who have a wide range of views. And a lot of my friends, profoundly disagree with me on a bunch of things. And that's never really stopped, close friendships. So I was absolutely delighted to have the conversation on that basis.
Yeah. I mean, we're in Australia, right? So nothing really turns on it. Like there's no party, with a militia, like, shooting the other party with the other militia in the street, so it's like.
But it's interesting, like there are taboos and, ideologies, and there are many things you can't say in public, and like, or and you're right, you're not going to be shot for them at all. So maybe it's just a question of kind of courage, but you it will affect your career prospects. So you're right. I don't want to overstate it. You're not, we don't have, a junta that's going to like lock you up for saying the wrong thing. But you will be kind of hounded, from polite society for kind of saying, many truths.
One thing you talk about a lot on your podcast, it's sort of a topic you seem to be quite interested in, is relationships and marriage and dating. And you had a very interesting evolutionary psychology expert on. What was her name?
Dinah Fleischman.
Yes. And
she's awesome.
Yes, very interesting. And I'm just wondering, is that connected? I know this is a civil liberties podcast, but is that connected in your mind to some of the things you've been talking about already, or are they just like separate hobbies of yours?
Look, I'm married. I've got 3 kids. So, I think everyone who's married and has kids, thinks deeply about that, because it's such a massive part of your life.
Yeah.
I think Diana specifically is extremely articulate and thoughtful and has very different views. And often I disagree with her, whatever, but she's one of those wonderful people with whom you can really disagree with wonderfully, and even if, I disagree with her, I think she's, even if I think she's wrong, I think she's interesting. And so, And so she was great to kind of talk about that. But I think the kind of and so look, I you know, and I'll give you an interesting example of how, you know, the relationship focus and the kids focus bleeds into my other stuff. Like I think I've had folks, you know, I've been quite public about being very kind of pro-natalist or pro-babies. Like basically, it's a really fancy way of saying I really love my kids and I love having more kids. And if it were up to me, I'd have like, you know, 50 kids or whatever. And I think, you know, that definitely, and so the really nice thing is that people started to reach out to me, not that many, but an occasion kind of out of the blue, either acquaintances or randoms, and saying, hey, I'm, you know, really excited. I'm going to be having a kid, or I just had a kid. And I'm just reaching out to, because I know you talk about it in your podcast. And I just think that was totally unexpected. And it's just so beautiful. Like it's a tiny thing. And, you know, I didn't expect it. And, you know, I'm not adding anything to anyone's life, but the fact that someone thinks correctly that I would care and that would bring me a little, you know, ray of joy in my day, and that I can kind of reciprocate in some way and tell them how beautiful it is what they're doing, you know, that doesn't cost anyone anything, and it's totally apolitical, and it's purely a beautiful thing. And like, I'm really grateful for that. I mean, that's only happened like I call it a handful of times or whatever. I don't want to overstate it, but that's been really fun. I think the underlying thing that kind of connects all the relationship stuff and the baby stuff to kind of the broader political things or kind of world things that I think about, you know, I think, you know, I kind of, you know, alluded to kind of institutional decay much earlier, but like, I think there's something broken. And I've noticed this for about a decade. I've kind of noticed this, like, you know, people are having, and this is not a secret, and a lot of other people write and speak about this, you know, extensively and more articulately than I do. But, you know, it's not news that fertility rates are declining. Men and women are having children much later, you know, well into their 30s now. People are having fewer children. You know, birth rates are sub replacement level in much of the kind of advanced world. And there's a fundamental sickness, like a social sickness associated with that. You know, I think if you kind of optimize for everything aside having kids, you know, that's by definition not going to last, right? You know, and there's something kind of broken in that society, and there's something broken in a society where people don't want to, you know, continue themselves.
Have you thought much about this? This is how I'm going to connect the relationships and the civil liberties. Have you thought much about the phenomenon of dating coaches? And I think I was a bit disturbed when I came across an article that said a bookshop was coming up with a new rule that you couldn't talk to others in the store because supposedly dating coaches were encouraging their students to do that. And this is in Sydney. And you know, when I was a few years ago, Japan was a big obsession of mine, and I wrote a little book about my reflections on Japan. And Japan is a place where it's still okay for men to try to, you know, pick up a girl like it used to be considered normal in Western society, and not be not feel that there's something wrong or morally reprehensible about doing that. And so my eyes were kind of opened to how normal behavior by men was kind of stigmatized in Western countries now.
Well, I haven't thought about dating coaches specifically, but that last comment of yours really resonates. You know, normal male behavior, like masculinity, is effectively stigmatized, and, you know, people might call it toxic masculinity or whatever, but I mean, being like, acting like a man, and, you know, manhood, and, you know, even saying these words are like at best cringe, you know, so in quotation marks, you know, or dangerous, you know, that's how these things are referred to in public. But actually there is such a thing as being a man. And in fact, picking up girls is absolutely still kosher. It's just that, women will say it's okay when the guy's like hot and they like him and his high status, and they'll just say, how evil and gross it is when they're not into the guy. Like it's actually like as basic and kind of bullshit as that. And so my thesis that I kind of put to Alex Kashida on the podcast was a lot of this is like, it's like a trap, or I don't know what the right word is. Like, I don't know if gaslighting is the right word. I don't even know what that word means, but like,
I like that word. Yeah,
I don't even know what it is, but like, I think like, I think there's all this messaging that, being a man's bad, and that actually, you should act in this kind of effeminate way. You should express your emotions and all this stuff. And I reckon like a lot of that's really done just to kind of weed out the chaff, and so that if you do that, well, then you're not my mating partner, so to speak. Like it's a giant trap, basically. So, like, I think that this kind of goes to a broader phenomenon. Like, I think the rise of dating coaches wouldn't surprise me, because you have a kind of rise of kind of single, unwanted men. There's this great chart going around with the way more male virgins, like there are way more male virgins, and what's really happened here is the market for sex has deregulated over the last decade or so, and kind of the dating apps have massively accelerated. And so what's happening is where if in the past you can think of marriage as this sex distribution mechanism, it's monogamous, and so everyone kind of gets a partner, and so the highest status and the most elite men kind of hoard partners, which kind of happens in polygamous societies. And so you can see it's kind of marriage is like this distributive mechanism. Now that marriage is being kind of delayed, and you kind of get this very more liquid and efficient market through Tinder and the like, what you're seeing is that the top crust of men are like eating like kings, and they couldn't be happier. It's like a very masculine world, and they're just sleeping with all these girls, and the world's fantastic. Then everyone else is basically losing, because girls they're obviously sleeping with the girls, and women across the field are kind of happy. And you can kind of see when you see who's matching with who and who's interested in who, you see these great graphs of like men basically there's like a normal distribution curve of who they're attracted to, whereas women, they're all basically competing for the top 20%. And so you see that kind of playing out where the top 20%, 15%, or whatever the number is, basically eat like kings, and all these women feel validated because they're like, oh, this high status male, this attractive male is sleeping with me, and I feel great. And then obviously there's no kind of commitment or whatever, and so they're kind of led on forever, and you're kind of getting these kind of false signals. And then there's this like rump of men who basically are starving. And so you get like, this, the kind of small portion of men who are richer than God, and majority of men are, far worse, and women on balance are far worse. And kind of, you see them waking up now and kind of resisting the kind of sex positive movement, increasingly, because, they kind of feel gypped. Which and they have been, they've effectively been lied to, and they've kind of been tricked by the system. And it's very hard. I don't know how it's going to kind of reverse, but in that universe, going to your original question, of course you're going to have dating coaches and the like, because you've got this growing market of like sexless men who are trying to figure out how to find a mate.
Okay, Thanks for joining us on Loose Cannon. Misha's Twitter will be in the show notes. Do you want to tell everyone what it is, or do you want to hide it?
No. Look, I mean, that's totally fine. No one really follows me on Twitter anyway. It's just my way of kind of
it's
meaning,
at
Misha _ Saul, Saul.
Yep.
And my web, you could probably like find things like things I write about and my podcast at www.mishasaul.com.
Yep. Brilliant. Please do get in contact also with us. The email address is loosecannonpod@gmail.com. This and also Parnell's Twitter is going to be in the show notes, and love to hear from people on guests to have on and just responses in general. Thanks very much for joining us, and see you next time.
Jonathan, absolute pleasure. Thank you.